This 14-page document, drafted 53 years ago with noble intentions, broke the American education system forever and twisted the concept of charity as we understand it. And to show you how impactful it really was, here is a graph tracking how much money Harvard started to make since this document was codified into law. It went from $1.5 billion to $53 billion today. Fair to say, for a college, this number defies even the boldest of economic predictions. But it's not just Harvard. Here is the surge in some of the Ivy League's wealth during the same time. Today, the top 5 schools on this list individually have more money than the GDP of at least 50 sovereign nations. And I should point out the fact that these are all not-for-profit private institutions. Yes, you heard that right. These are all non-profits. Needless to say, this is unusual. But what's interesting is that this modern gold rush can be traced back to a single, unassuming policy document, which ironically is also responsible for the fact that within the last decade, the yearly closure rate of these colleges in America has nearly tripled, and this trend is only getting worse with each passing year. But when this document, referred to as the Uniform Management of Institutional Funds Act, was introduced in 1972, the lawmakers were only trying to solve one particular problem. As the name suggests, they were addressing the management of endowment funds, which are simply gifts and donations that these colleges receive as they are non-profits. It's like a big pot of money that just can't sit in a checking account because it'll lose its value over time, which they say in the document, and it's a reasonable thing to do because at the time, the legal framework that existed throughout most of the 50 states, they argued was a little restrictive. For example, the Constitution of the state of Montana did not allow the investment of the university's endowment funds in private bonds or stocks. So to make sure that the money these institutions already had remained unaffected by inflation, and people in academia wouldn't lose their jobs during an economic downturn, thereby preserving American supremacy, they added this one section: the Delegation of Investment Management, which oddly enough was responsible for the most damage. It basically allowed the universities to enter into contracts with Wall Street, and when this law was enacted by 47 states, within a few short years it turned America's premier institutions into lucrative investment vehicles by opening up a loophole known as indirect tax arbitrage. Something you have to understand to believe that it's real. At the heart of it, it's really simple if you know what these colleges are trying to do. Their only goal is to keep growing the endowment funds, period. Now, keeping that in mind, the problem they face is that they also have to spend a lot of this money on the college's operating expenses, like professor salaries and admin costs, which for Harvard adds up to about $6.5 billion a year, but every dollar spent is a dollar not invested on Wall Street, meaning lower compounded growth, resulting in smaller endowment funds, which for them means losing hundreds of millions of dollars every year. You don't see 3,400% ROI by spending your money, but if that's the case, if they are not spending their money, then why do we keep hearing about these new multi-million-dollar football stadiums and shiny new college dorms all the time? Well, it's a key element of the little scheme they concocted by using their status as non-profits to raise money. And by raising money, I mean borrowing money. It's a simple 3-step formula. Here's how it works. An Ivy League school decides they want to borrow $100 million from the investors to finance the construction of new student housing. And because these colleges already have billions of dollars in their investment portfolio and a bag full of prestige, they are rated AAA by the ratings agencies like S&P Global or Moody's. And as defined in Section 501c3 of the IRC, like all nonprofits, these universities are now eligible to issue non-taxable municipal bonds, which is just a fancy word for a massive public loan. For example, Take a look at this non-taxable municipal bond issued by Harvard on April 9, 2024, worth $735 million. It was primarily issued to finance the renovations and construction of new housing on their Alston campus, and guess what? It was rated AAA by both S&P Global and Moody's. Perfect. Bond issued. Step 1 complete. Now on to step 2. Why would the investors buy these bonds? Well, why not? It's Harvard. They already have billions in the bank. Their credit ratings are exceptional, and as a wealthy investor, you just found an ironclad tax-exempt investment, and that's exactly what happened when Harvard issued $735 million bonds to build a dorm. They were sold within a single trading day. Step 2 complete. The richest college in the world, worth over $50 billion, has now successfully borrowed $735 million, and the only problem now is that the college has to pay an interest of about 4% on these bonds. This is where it gets interesting, and step 3 really is their magic sauce. Here is what they can't do. They cannot invest the bond proceeds directly on Wall Street because it would mean that they are borrowing the money as a non-profit at 4% and investing it for returns of roughly 8%, which is typical for Harvard. It's called direct tax arbitrage, and it's against the law. So they get creative. Remember the operating expenses, the money they have to spend for universities' day-to-day operations? Well, instead of only using the endowment funds, they use the revenue generated from the new construction projects to cover the operating expenses instead. In the endowment funds, the billions they have already invested on Wall Street, mostly in hedge funds and private equity, well, as long as the return on those investments stays above 4%, which, again, for Harvard averages around 8%, and for Ivy League collectively around 9%. They can now print money at will, and we see shiny new buildings and already massive yet ever-expanding college campuses in the United States as tangible manifestations of their crafty financial strategy. So, essentially, these colleges misuse their status as non-profits to incentivize the investors to buy their bonds and then indirectly invest that borrowed money on Wall Street, earning a higher tax-free return than the interest owed on their bond payments. Think of it like this. You have $10,000 in your savings account that yields an interest rate of about 8%. And then you miraculously find a credit card that charges 4% interest on anything borrowed, as long as you don't transfer the money directly into your savings account. So now, you, my friend, have found an infinite money glitch in the matrix, which is why the bond market for colleges in the US has broken all records, as almost a third of the universities in the United States are private nonprofits, and they all went on a 50-year-long shopping bonanza. And this prompted an investigation by the Congressional Budget Office, a federal agency that released an extensive report pointing out the misuse of tax-exempt municipal bonds by colleges in America. And according to Charlie Eaton, an associate professor at the University of California, Merced, a highly cited expert on this topic, just in 2012 alone, the federal government lost $19.6 billion in tax revenue, and it does not account for parallel tax breaks given to these institutions by the state and local governments, which in most cases results in underfunded K-12 local public schools in those districts due to lost property taxes. But you could say that this would all probably be worth it if the universities actually spent their endowment on their original goal, which was to fund education during the economic downturns, but research shows that the universities actually reduce spending and selfishly cut jobs when they are needed the most, something scholars refer to as endowment hoarding, and there is plenty of evidence of this happening all over America. It's a win-win situation for the colleges, who get to dodge taxes on their outsized endowment investment returns, the banks who pocket hefty fees for helping colleges issue these bonds, the already wealthy investors who are making a safe tax-exempt investment by buying these bonds, and the university's investment partners, who sometimes also sit on the boards of these colleges, which is a story for another day. But the way the Ivy League is enriching itself is not only costing the taxpayers more than it's worth, it also has side effects which are haunting the rest of the colleges in America in a way no economist could ever foresee. You see, when Harvard announces a new housing project worth millions of dollars, they are doing it because that's one of the ways they grow their endowment. But when a regional nonprofit college announces that they are building one of the largest man-made lakes in the state, and yes, that was a real thing, they are not doing it for the same reason. They are following the same formula of issuing municipal bonds and are going millions of dollars in debt in the hopes that their student enrollment numbers will go up. Because unlike the Ivy League, those colleges do not have a massive endowment and depend mostly on tuition for their operating expenses. The Ivy League formula only works for the Ivy League, not for others. Well, it did for more than 5 decades, but not anymore, because we are precisely at a point in time in history, almost 18 years after the 2008 recession, where there aren't enough students to go around. A demographic cliff is here, and the battle to win over every single student has gotten more intense than ever. So the only hope for those smaller colleges is that an 18-year-old in Arkansas who is about to choose a college notices that lake on a brochure and just might decide to enroll, bringing in much-needed revenue. Which is exactly what Birmingham Southern College, a 169-year-old institution, did in early 2010, and just when they finished this massive project, their financial troubles first came to light. After drowning themselves in debt to attract new students, they finally closed their doors on May 31st, 2024. It's the same story with Cazenovia College, which started in 1824, College of St. Rose, Alderson Broaddus University, and numerous others, which have ceased operations in the last 15 years after pursuing aggressive campus expansion, adding new residence halls and athletic centers. And since these colleges are obviously aware of this demographic cliff, why are they choosing to go hundreds of millions of dollars in debt only to shut down a few years later? Well, it depends on who you ask, because on one hand, the Institutional Funds Act allowed them to issue municipal bonds and borrow money at a rate that does not reflect the real market conditions. This becomes evident if you look at the number of bond impairments or technical defaults of these colleges in the last 15 years. The number is now a mind-boggling 500% above this median, and the credit rating agencies have taken notice, resulting in more downgrades than upgrades every single year. Yet these colleges continue to issue riskier municipal bonds, offering higher and higher interest rates, participating in a quiet death race. They are aware of the fact that not all of them are going to make it to the end of the road, so they are betting the house on the hope that if they have the bigger campus, the fancier dorm, or an Olympic-sized pool, they might be the one to survive. Because the only other option is to downsize, which perhaps they can't do, at least not until we start judging these colleges on their balance sheets and not on the size of their football stadiums, giving them incentives to cut costs instead of showing off their flashy campuses all before it's really too late.